I'm John Kane, and this is Resistance Radio. I want to thank you for coming along for the ride. I'm doing an interesting show. It's actually probably the first show that I'm doing it that is a listener request. It's not like I'm, at a piano bar here, but I guess for all intents and purposes, I do take requests. I'm doing a show on the Kinzua Dam. I know listener Nick, who has actually requested this a couple of times, if I'm not mistaken, Reggie. He's wanted me to talk about the Kinzua Dam project, so I'm going to talk about that because it's not just a dam project. It's we got to talk about it at a deeper level. So, but before I get into it, let me first. Again, welcome listeners. It is great to be on WBAI. I'm not on WPFW this week because they're doing a special. I don't know if it has to do with Labor Day weekend. I'm not sure, but they have special programming going on at WPFW tomorrow. So be sure to check it out if you dare. But I know that I've got listeners here in New York. I've got listeners who are catching this online. I post it up as a video on YouTube and on Facebook, and of course, if you listen via the WBI website, you can catch this anywhere. So my first request is, as always, please support WBAI. Without this station, there is no Resistance Radio, and that's the bottom line. So, I get asked all the time as a Native person, hey, what can we do to help? Well, look, if you help WBAI, you're not just helping me in this program and the message that I'm getting out there. You're helping all of the messages that are getting out there across the entire broadcast grid of WBAI. So, I do ask that you support this station. I ask that you go to the phone lines and go online. So let me give out those numbers and see if we can't get you guys to respond to my personal plea. So if you want to go online, you can go to Buddy. That's BUDDY.WBAI.org, and you can follow the prompts and give a one-time donation. You can become a buddy, which is a sustaining member of the station, and you do that by giving up your credit card or bank account information, and make a commitment to $5, $10, $20 a month, whatever the case may be. You can treat us a little bit like a streaming service. The main thing is if you make a contribution on a monthly basis, you are really helping us out in a way that may seem bigger than the actual donation because we know we can count on it each month. So that's what we ask when we ask you to become a buddy of the program and of the station. Now you can also go online, go to the phone lines, and you can dial 1-833-922-4692. We can use the letters in there. It's 1-833-WBAI-NYC. But again, the numbers are 833-922-4692, and follow the prompts. Hey, look, if by chance you get a voicemail or a voice message or an answering machine, just leave your name and your number, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Sometimes too many calls come in at once, and we can't take them. So by all means, leave your information, not your financial information, just your name and your number, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Look, we are in strange times. I know you hear it on a lot of programs, and you're going to hear it on this program because when we look at what this current federal administration is doing, they are cutting funding. They are trying to assert their will on everything from what is truth, what is history, what is media, all of that stuff. So, when I think about stations like this, look, we're coming into Labor Day. And there is probably no station that has done more to advance the cause of labor than WBAI. So, again, if you're going to celebrate this holiday weekend, please keep WBAI in mind. We, not only do we have Bob Hennelly at the helm, who is a incredibly strong labor activist and advocate, and he solicited some support from organized labor for the station, but. Look, at the end of the day, it isn't the organization. It's not the institutions. It's not, and certainly we're not getting funded by a whole lot of philanthropic groups. It's you, the listener. It's you, the listener, who we count on. So, again, I ask that you either go to the phone lines or you go online and support WBAI and support Resistance Radio. Look, it's almost telling that we live at a time where so many of the programs on the station have the word resistance in them, and it's because we just can't take it. I saw a post. I think it was by David Zirin who asked, "Is anybody seeing all the posts about the people who are showing up on the streets in Washington?" Because I hadn't seen any of the mobs. I mean, yeah, we saw the guys throw the Subway sandwich at at a guy in uniform, but the media is just not covering it. I mean, they are not covering. And look, and I get it. It's dangerous. It's dangerous to get out there and put yourself, even as the member of the press, to put yourself out there. But you know what? We got to put the big boy pants on, or big girl pants on, I guess. We got to step up here. We've got to, not only do we have to offer more resistance to what we know are injustices, wherever they are, but we got to talk about it. We can't just pretend it's not happening, or let the corporatized, monetized mainstream media be the only voices that are out there. So, like we got to do more. We got to talk about it. We've got to, do the postings on social media and that kind of stuff. And look, I get it. There's a whole lot of people who are really indifferent about social media. I realize people are taking pictures of their food, and and they're doing things like, casting false impressions about what people should look like and be like and that kind of stuff. But there's also some content on social media that is valuable. I'd like to think that mine is. So, again, I think we all have to do a little bit more. And when you ask that question, when you ask it of me, when somebody says, "What can we do to help Native people?" Well, I'll tell you one thing you can do is you can assure that a Native person will be on the radio in New York City and in Washington D.C. and across the internet. And of course, I've been doing this for a long time. WBAI and WPFW have carved out spaces in on their broadcast grid for Native voices long before I came here. So I appreciate what they've done, but they can't do it without you. They can't do it without. And of course, here on WBAI, the number of Native voices on the station just got cut in half because with the retirement or the moving on, as some might say, of Teoka's the Ghost Horse, who played a huge role in bringing me into this position. So I'm it. So I'm hoping that you'll support this station and support this program. Okay. Before I even get into the Kinzua Dam, I've talked about the film that I was played a major part in producing. It's called The Long Hope. We are going to be doing some private screenings initially. So we are looking for people to reach out to us if they want to be invited to these screenings. And I know that seems strange because we're in the film festival submission phase, there are certain things we can't do. We can't do our premieres necessarily the way we would do it if we weren't trying to get the film festivals to get us some recognition here. And I'm not talking about getting awards, but just getting that kind of exposure. In a perfect world, we'll get picked up by a streaming service. The film will get streamed and possibly get in a position to negotiate doing an ongoing series of things. As we recorded in hours and hours of footage for what is almost a 2-hour film as it is, we have a lot of footage, and we know there's a lot of threads that can be pulled on this on the subject matter that we covered in this film. One of the issues that I do cover in the film is the Kinzua Dam project. We're doing we did this film primarily out of the Seneca Nation territory of Cattaraugus. That's where the Ross and Holly John, who funded the film, where they live. But Ross has his roots in the Allegheny territory of the Seneca Nation, which is where the Kinzua Dam project took place. So much of what we talk about in the film has to do with the unlawful, immoral, racist policies of the United States. And as I say in the film, there may not be a greater example of this than what it was been called the Kinzua Dam project. And this project was done primarily because of flooding in Pittsburgh throughout almost its entire existence, but certainly the damages that were being incurred on the city of Pittsburgh because somebody in their infinite wisdom decided to build a city where 3 rivers converge. was becoming more and more extensive, especially in the early and mid 20th century. So the plan was, well, let's try to beat Mother Nature and control at least one of the rivers. Well, one of the rivers is the one that flows through Seneca territory, the Seneca territory of Allegheny. It's the Allegheny River. So the plan was, and it wasn't even the best plan. The plan was to put a dam up and control the flow of the Allegheny River as it goes into the state of Pennsylvania. So just over the Pennsylvania line from where the Seneca Nation territory of Allegheny is, they constructed a dam. Now they did this illegally because here's the thing. I know people understand what eminent domain is, and that's when the federal government or even the state government goes in and takes property for a project or some interest that is supposed to serve the greater good. And the greater good, and sometimes it's just about the number of people. So if you look at it just from that perspective, the view was that the number of people who live in Pittsburgh was more than the number of people who lived on the Seneca Nation territory of Allegheny. So guess who becomes the sacrifice zones? Now, the problem is eminent domain really requires that it's the taking of land that is part of the United States. And that's not the case with here. The lands that I live on here on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, and much of the lands of the Haudenosaunee in our ancestral homelands are not held in trust by the federal government. They are not U.S. titled lands. The Seneca Nation, the Seneca people hold the title to these lands. It is not New York State. It's not the United States. And the thing is, they know it. It's been discussed. We've had these conversations. They have had the conversations themselves. In fact, for many years, they were saying, well, we can't really do much because technically it's not the United States. And it isn't just about it technically not being. Look, 1794, the United States pushed it on many of the people of the Six Nations what they called the Canandaigua Treaty. It says 3 times in that treaty that the United States recognizes that we own our property, that the property is ours, and that the United States will never claim the same, nor will they disturb us in the free use and enjoyment of that land. It says it 3 times in that treaty. We didn't negotiate the treaty. We didn't draft it. In fact, I would argue we didn't even sign it. But this is what's on the books. And the United States still carves out $3,500 worth of treaty cloth every year and sends it out to native territories so they can claim they're fulfilling the obligations, even though they've broken almost every aspect of the treaty besides giving cloth. $3,500 worth of cloth. Yeah. So the idea that the eminent domain would even be suggested for this dam project is absurd all by itself. And of course, here's the thing. It wasn't really technically used because the United States didn't claim the land. They just condemned it for our use. The land is still Seneca land. It's still there. The land didn't go anywhere. But here's what they did. They built this dam, and with the understanding that they were going to create this 10,000 acre flood zone. And all of that 10,000 acres would be considered, you couldn't build on it. Now, we can argue whether we could do whatever we want with the land or not. And so that's a whole nother issue. But the problem is, when you talk about doing things like commercial activities, which farming is, and let me back up. Native people have been farmers on this land, had farmed this land since time immemorial. Corn was developed as not just as a foodstuff, but even as a species by native people. Corn doesn't exist in nature. There's no such thing as wild corn. There's wild rice, but there's no such thing as wild corn. Corn was, for all intents and purposes, manipulated, genetically modified by hand, not by science, not in a lab, not with chemicals, not with DNA, but by selective breeding of the corn. We produced a foodstuff that now feeds the world. We did that. We did that without, the so-called technology of the of Europe. We did that. But it wasn't just corn that we grew. We grew we grew many crops. We gathered some things that nature offered us, but we grew many crops. And among the things that people know the Haudenosaunee for are what we call the three sisters, and that's corn, beans, and squash. Now, here's the thing about corn, beans, and squash. And when I say squash, I don't just mean the pumpkins and the squash. I mean the seeds. Because here's the thing: corn can be dried and stored almost indefinitely if it's stored properly. Same with beans, and same with seeds. Pumpkin seeds and squash seeds are nutritious are nutritious all by themselves. Beyond being able to plant them and grow the fruit that they produce, the seeds themselves are our food stuff. So we grew those three products and those three crops for not just subsistence. We weren't just subsistence farmers. We traded. We built stores. We built these huge areas that we stored food. Why? Because we knew about things like flooding. We knew about things like drought. We always had enough food. Traditionally, we had enough food stored not only to get us through in a given area through a drought or a flood or whatever else, but to trade with our other Haudenosaunee peoples, our other territories, our communities, and non-Haudenosaunee peoples. It was our form of commerce that existed long before white folks showed up. Was it the capitalist system? No, it wasn't. It was a system of trade, and it was a system of fair trade and making sure that people would survive in when nature threw some of its tough stuff at us. So we weren't just subsistence farmers, but we grew the food for our own consumption. We didn't grow it just for trade. We didn't just grow it to hoard food, to raise up the value, prop up the value and get more stuff for it. No, oftentimes we were trading food for food, and of course other goods. So that's the history. So when white folks get here and they start trying to push us into farming, they're not trying to push us into that kind of farming. They're trying to push us into commercial farming, the idea of raising cattle. We didn't do animals. We grew food. We didn't create the carbon footprint that people are now realizing get associated with raising livestock. No, there was plenty of wildlife out there. We knew how to get meat. We knew how to get fish. We didn't have to farm them. We didn't have to build up fences and put them in pens. We didn't have to do that. I'm not saying we don't do some of that now, but we didn't have to do it then. So we didn't do that kind of stuff. But this is what we got pushed into. As forced assimilation and reduction of our lands were happening, we were being forced to farm in the way that white people did. So producing milk was what we did. We had some really valuable farmland, especially on the Allegheny territory of the Seneca Nation. And the most valuable farmland are those lands, and this goes throughout the world, the most fertile and high-producing farmlands that exist in the world oftentimes happen where there are flood zones because of the sediment, because of what the rivers. The Nile River produced some of the most fertile lands in the world, in Egypt. Well, the Allegheny River did too. And the Allegheny River didn't flood all the time. In fact, its banks would swell and it would deposit those, all of those nutrients and that kind of stuff. Of course, that'll all get dammed up once you put a dam up. But this was a big part of who we were. And then as we got pushed into a commercial farming, we had a modicum of success doing some of that. But the thing is about commercial farming is you have to load the front end so much. So it's capital intensive. Oftentimes you need equipment that wasn't required when we were doing our traditional farming. So now you got tractors and you have barns, and if you're doing milk, you've got to have all the milking equipment. You got to have all the processing equipment for to gather that milk, and if we didn't pasteurize it, we had to have it stored until somebody could pick it all up. And it also became very regulated, and commercial farming in particular. So as the regulations came in for things like dairy farming, And all of a sudden, there was this big push to for stainless steel to be used throughout, these milking parlors and such. We didn't have the money for that, and here's where it gets a little ugly. We also couldn't borrow money. We couldn't put our land up for collateral. Frankly, we probably wouldn't if we could. So we couldn't go to the bank and get the same kind of loans that a white farmer could. We couldn't get the same kind of insurances that white farmers could. So we didn't have the protections that, or the, again, the capital, the upfront costs to do this business. And as regulations came and things got more expensive and it got more competitive, we essentially were already getting driven out of the farming industry. Even though there were successful farms, they became less successful. And we're talking about in the 50s and the 60s here. So forget about now. We know what every small farmer, regardless of who they are, what they go through competing against corporate farms, the agribusiness as they call it. But then you build the Kinzua Dam, and then you tell people you can't farm that land. 10,000 acres of the most fertile farmland of the Seneca Nation, of the Seneca people, is now just sitting there, barren, going feral, since the 1960s. So here is the project, and I'll give you a rundown. And I did cover this in the film, The Long Hope, which is, we're going to start doing some of those screenings in September, so stay tuned. Like I said, nothing demonstrates. This is actually the narrative that I wrote for the film. As nothing demonstrates this more than the Kinzua Dam project of the 1960s. The project was developed after major flooding in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the mid-20th century. The proposed plan required the flooding and condemnation of over 10,000 acres of the Seneca Nation's Allegheny Territory. The Army Corps of Engineers began construction in 1960, and the grounds were cleared, and the dam was completed in 1965. Filling the reservoir continued right up until 1967. Homes, churches, farms, and all structures were leveled or burned. Graves were dug up, and some remains repatriated. Not all of them, but some of them. The flooding and lands required for the floodplain displaced over 600 Senecas and deprived every generation, and we've had at least 2 generations, depending on how you want to measure a generation, of Senecas have been deprived of living and occupying and working this land ever since. The project also created the loss of most of what was considered the corn planter tract, which was on the Pennsylvania side. That land just lost. It's gone. It's covered. And those families were cleared out. The families were cleared out, homes, ball fields, playgrounds, of course, graveyards, as I said, and thousands of acres of fertile farmland. The dam actually produced hydroelectric power, but that hydroelectric power wasn't routed to the Senecas, and it wasn't routed to the Senecas who were displaced. They actually built a whole area that they called Jimtown or Jimison Town, because all of the homes that were leveled, burnt, all of it, they relocated. Look, and I'm not saying there wasn't money paid out. There was, but it wasn't equitable. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't legal. So this is what happened. This is what the Kinzua Dam project was. Now, and I know if you didn't pay attention to the dates, we're talking about the 60s. One of the things that was happening at the time was a very, very close presidential election between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. Kennedy, who liked to claim to be such a humanitarian and civil rights defender and that kind of stuff, he actually wrote the Seneca Nation a letter apologizing, like saying, "I'm sorry." Yeah, Joe Biden, I'm talking about you. Saying you're sorry makes the sin go away. He apologized, but he needed Pennsylvania. Yeah, Pennsylvania was a swing state even then. He needed Pennsylvania badly to beat Nixon. So, who did he sacrifice? The Senecas. So the Senecas got thrown under a bus by John F. Kennedy. And what they get? They got an apology. Now, look, I know they built some crappy low-income housing for the Seneca. Some people got paid some money for the loss of their lands and that kind of stuff. But it was never enough. And ironically, to this day, most of that land has never been flooded. So they were displaced of this land. And I'm not saying that it's not going to be flooded. And here's the thing. It can be flooded anytime because all white people got to do is raise the water level at the dam, which the Senecas have no say in. They not only don't get any use of the hydroelectric power produced, they also have no right to control how much of what the reservoir produces as a recreational area, how much they get to it. They don't have a seat at the table. No seat at the table. Their land is flooded, and they don't have a seat at the table. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So when I talk about things like being regarded as wards of the federal government, and that the United States is our trustee, and that this plenary powers doctrine exists, that Congress can do whatever they want to do, and it's legal. It can't be checked. It can't be challenged. That's the danger of this level of authority, of this level of power, unchecked power. I mean, and I say unchecked because let me remind people, they passed a law called the Indian Child Welfare Act. And the Indian Child Welfare Act was supposed to protect Native children from being ripped out of their homes and sent to be raised by white people, whether it was through adoption and foster care or through the residential schools. That's what it was supposed to do. But it didn't empower us to have say over whether a child could or should be removed from home. The states were still doing that. All the Indian Child Welfare Act did, for all of its fluffy language and everything else, all the Indian Child Welfare Act did was tell states they had to put a priority on Native kids being placed in Native homes. Now, it didn't mean absolute and exclusive. It just meant that we had to be the priority. The priority had to be placing Native kids in Native homes. So that's the federal government telling the state government that our culture was worth preserving and that they had to basically listen to the federal government. So when this family in Texas challenges the Indian Child Welfare Act and say, well, it's racist. These are just Americans like anybody else. How can you have a law that says white people can't adopt a Native kid? You don't do that to any other race. It's discriminatory. That's what the Keens were arguing. That it was discriminatory not only towards them as being white people, but they're claiming that it was also discriminatory towards the child because this child was being denied the right to be raised by a white affluent family. I mean, it's kind of a compelling argument in many ways. The problem is that we aren't a race of Americans. We are a distinct peoples. We always have, from day one when they wrote the Constitution, they said excluding Indians not taxed, excluding us. We weren't a part of it. So the fact that they did these gross manipulations by claiming that we were wards of the federal government, how the hell did we become wards of the federal government? Based on what? What legal premise is there for a people you've always disassociated yourself with, legally and politically, to all of a sudden declare that we were wards of the federal government and that you place yourself as our trustees? We didn't sign any trust documents. That's why I argue against the doctrine of Christian discovery, the trust doctrine, and the plenary powers doctrine. That's what my whole film, The Long Hope, that's what it's all about. And the Kinzua Dam project is just emblematic of it. But so is this Indian Child Welfare Act case. Because during the arguments for that case, you had Justice Sam Alito saying, but what is the extent of this plenary powers? And there was no extent. They could go as far as they wanted to go. But he said, it sounds like this power is absolute. Because if there's any limits to it, I'm not seeing it. And the Solicitor General said, who was arguing against the Keens, he was arguing in favor of keeping the Indian Child Welfare Act. But his argument was based on the fact that Congress has ultimate power to pass any law they want regarding Native people. So the argument about whether Indian Child Welfare Act was racist or not wasn't even going to be heard. That's a moot point as far as the federal government is concerned, because they can pass a law that is discriminating when it comes to Native people. And it's not because they're recognizing our sovereignty. See, that's the thing. They're claiming that they're recognizing the value of our culture and whatever autonomy that culture represents, but they aren't recognizing us as a distinct sovereign people. That would be an easy thing to do. That'd be easy to tell the Brackens, no, you can't take these kids. This is like you trying to take them from another country. But no, they wouldn't make that argument. They just made the argument that since Congress passed the Indian Child Welfare Act, it was unchallengeable. Two of the justices, and I'm not saying Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito were against the notion of the Indian Child Welfare Act. We don't even know. What they were against was that they couldn't see where in the Constitution of the United States there was any legal basis for establishing this so-called plenary powers of Congress. They didn't see it, and they argued against it. And the crazy part is, because we talk about this trust doctrine thing, when Sam Alito asked this the Solicitor General, well, what's the limit of the power? If there is any, I don't see it. And he goes, well, the limit would be that they have to utilize that plenary powers in accordance to their trust responsibility. Well, that's complete circular reason, because they're both interdependent on each other. So when you have this kind of power and you can just take land, I mean, we're watching stuff play out in Ukraine, we're watching stuff play out in Gaza, but the United States is guilty of everything that not whether the government is really condemning Israel, which they aren't, or really condemning Russia, which they aren't. The American people are, but most American people are completely oblivious to how much the United States has done the exact same thing to Native people, to the Hawaiian Kingdom. I mean, this has been done repeatedly by the United States. And even Barack Obama stood there from the White House espousing the virtues of the Homestead Act, the idea that the United States took our land. And what a great piece of legislation it was. What a great policy it was, and how it was such a boon to the American economy. Yeah, it's amazing when you get free labor out of slaves and free land out of Native people. It's amazing how prosperous white people can become. So, again, when we talk about things like Labor Day coming up here, you have to understand that the exploitation of human beings for labor is tied right to things like the doctrine of Christian discovery. I mean, it says it right in the papal bulls that these things were based on, that you could subject Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ to perpetual servitude. You can take all their stuff and you can make them slaves. The church didn't just approve of slavery, they promoted it. And of course, they promoted genocide. And then played an active role in perpetrating the genocide through the role of administering and running the boarding schools and residential schools across the United States and Canada and Africa and South America and Australia, continent after continent. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. It's pretty remarkable. But to my friend Nick, who was called in several times, asking me to cover the Kinzua Dam project. That dam exists still, by the way. I mean, in fact, when the federal government was looking at possibly turning over control of the dam to another party, mostly because of the hydroelectric part of it, the Seneca Nation submitted a proposal to become the operator of the dam, and they were passed over. They went to just a regular utility company. So the dam still exists. I know there's decommissioning of dams that have affected things like salmon runs and stuff like that. The difference is we're not downstream of this dam. We're upstream of it. So we are the victims of the flooding that will occur when they get concerned about the flooding of Pittsburgh. That's what the dam is all about. And I got to tell you, it wasn't even the best solution, and it actually hasn't been the best solution because Pittsburgh still has experienced flooding. So it didn't solve the problem. It just took a huge tract of the Seneca lands of the Allegheny Reservation or Allegheny Territory of the Seneca Nation and said, you can't do anything with that. Now, I will say that there are people who are starting to go back and do it. I think they've got buffalo that are grazing in some of those areas. So I think there's a conscious effort to start to use that land again, but you're not going to see people moving back there. You're not going to see people living there once again. You're not going to see, the kind of life that used to be there, where the farms and the farmhouses and the ball fields, the playgrounds, the schoolhouses. No, that's none of that's ever coming back as long as that dam sits there. So, to Nick, I thank you for raising this to me multiple times. I do want to assure you that we did cover this. My good friend Ross John, whose family owns some of that land that's in that area, that condemned area. He's in the film. He was one of the major producers and basically funded the film. He's in the film and he talks about it extensively. But there are a lot of threads in this film. And again, once again, the film is called The Long Hope. I've posted the trailers and some of the information associated with it. I do. If people want to get a hold of me about hosting a screening, like I said, we are in the film festival hunt. We did just get accepted, by the way, to the Red Nation International Film Festival. It's one of the larger ones, and it's on the West Coast. It's in Los Angeles, and that film festival runs in November from the 7th to the 16th. I don't know. I don't know if we're going to win any awards or anything like that, but we do plan to go there. They are going to feature our film. I'm still not sure to this day if they're primarily going to stream it or if they're going to premiere it there. We're still waiting for word on that. So, but I am working on the 20th. I do plan to come to New York. We're going to screen it at the New School. I'm working with some other folks in various places in Brooklyn, up in Harlem, out in Long Island to come up with other venues to stream the film, to screen the film, I should say. In a perfect world, here's what I'd like to see happen with our film. That will get some attention at some film festivals, and we'll get a major streaming service to pick us up, and not just stream the film, but allow us to pull the thread on some of the areas of this film to do a series. So that's what I'd like to see happen. Don't know if it will, but we're going to keep producing. The one thing I will say is we don't know this industry. So I want to be clear. Once we made this film, we didn't even know what the hell to do with it. We didn't know how to roll it out. We didn't know, what are the process. So we're fumbling a little bit as we go along to figure out how we get eyes on this thing. And do we want to bring it to New York and Washington and Chicago and Pittsburgh and Cleveland? Yes, we do. But I want Native people to see this. We're going to produce, a couple of slogans out of this thing. And one of the things that I came up with just yesterday, I said, look, there's nothing wrong with not knowing. The problem is not wanting to know or refusing to know. So when you see the content, and we're breaking the narrative. We're breaking the narrative on what everybody's been spoon-fed. Happy little pilgrims and happy little Indians, all that stuff. And what our own people. Look, part of, I talked about the Indian Child Welfare Act. Look, our people praised the win against the Brackeen family in the Indian Child Welfare Act, even though it further cemented this unchecked power that the federal government has over our lives. That shouldn't have been the defense. The defense should have been that we are sovereign, that we are distinct, autonomous people, and that we get to control what happens to our children. But that's not what the law says. And that's not what Congress passed in the Indian Child Welfare Act. They say, no, we get to control what happens to your children. So out of the goodness of our hearts, we're going to tell states that you have to place these kids in native homes. Now, that's not happening completely either. It's not. In fact, there's ways around it by using the whole cross-border thing. Well, if a white family wants a native kid, we'll get them out of Canada. Canadian white family in Canada wants a native kid, they'll get them out of the United States. Yeah, there's ways around it. And of course, these are still problems that are plaguing other indigenous peoples across the globe. Look, we got time to do maybe a couple of calls, and I'm not asking Nick specifically to call, but certainly Nick or anybody else is welcome to call. So let me give out the number if somebody wants to give a call. We only got about 10 minutes left, so the number is 212-209-2877. That's the studio line, 212 209-2877. It was always my intent that possibly we take a few calls at the end. I know I could have rambled on more on these subject matters, and I will. I mean, like I told Nick, I will talk about the Kinzua Dam project more. I will talk about some of the content of this film that we produced. Again, the film is called The Long Hope, and I hope that many people will begin to see this film and understand it. One of the questions that I was asked, by the way, is what do you want people to do once they watch this film? And it's funny, I was just listening to the previous program, and they said, look, we need people to act. We need people to stand up and rise up. Now, honestly, I don't expect legions of white people to stand up and defend Native people. But when you're given the opportunity to help us make our argument against the federal government's authoritarian rule of our lives, and you get a chance to, whether it's at the voting booth or whether it's, talking to a politician, whatever it is, we need you to understand that there is a unique system of racism that Native people experience. And I'm not saying it's worse than what black people have experienced. I'm not saying it's worse than what women have experienced or any other people who are marginalized. I'm not saying it's worse, but it's distinct. There are specific laws on the books that were built on these authoritarian rule-based legal doctrines that have no place in the Constitution, no foundation in the Constitution, no foundation by any stretch of the imagination that is consistent with the so-called creeds of the United States. So I say that. Again, the number to call is 212-209-2877. Reggie, I don't know if we got anybody thinking about calling in or not. What do we got? Anything?
Not yet, but I'll let you know.
Okay, all right, appreciate that. Now, I will say that, as we begin to roll this film out, like I said, we can't do a public feature of the film in a major. Most of it's going to be private screening. So we are looking for people to reach out to us. And if you don't know how to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me through the station and on social media. I'm very present on Facebook. You can get a hold of me, and we can talk about possibly not only if you've got a place that might be interested in screening the film, but if you want to be invited to a screening, then you can reach out. We got anybody yet there? I heard you clear your throat. That usually means you're going to tell me something.
Yes, we do have a caller, and they're ready to go.
All right, well, let's go to it. Caller, you're up first. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Nick from Parsippany.
Nick, what a coincidence. I was just talking about you.
Yeah, I heard. Listening. I can't but to recommend the book by Anthony Wallace, The Death and Rebirth of the Seneca. And the book ends with the Kinzua Dam and the grave removals. I made a pilgrimage to see both Handsome Lake out in Onondaga and the grave of corn planter El Boyle, if I'm saying the name right.
Yeah.
And by pure accident, I ran into Red Jacket's great-granddaughter, and her grandfather was one of the people who was allowed to intern the graves in the cemetery there in Pennsylvania. I forget the name of the cemetery right now. But do you guys own any part of that cemetery? Is that like land in Pennsylvania that you...
If you follow the Allegheny River down, there are a couple places.
Still own?
If you follow the Allegheny River down, past the Kinzua Dam into Pennsylvania, there are a couple of places where there's some signage that reflect that it's Seneca land. But most of it had been flooded out. So the corn planter tract in particular, a lot of it was lost. But there's still, obviously the land is there, but some of it is constantly flooding or became part of the river or whatever else. Look, I want to also say there's a book by, I think, Lauren Hopman, that's Haptman. And I think he's got a book specifically about the Kinzua Dam too that you might want to check out. That's another place to go. Like I said, we do mention this thing in the film, and I think it's important that people understand that it wasn't just about the dam. It was about how much it was affecting the lifestyles of people who had been farmers before white people came here, frankly. but that area, because of the way the river ebbed and flowed, would oftentimes be some of the most fertile lands that the Seneca Nation had. And because the Seneca Nation has almost a unique growing cycle here, between here and Cayuga territory, we had some of the most, we had some of the largest food stores, storage areas of food. In fact, when they talked about Washington sending Clinton and I can't think of the other guy's name into Sullivan into Cayuga and Seneca territory. Washington specifically gave them orders to destroy all of the cornfields, burn up all the food stores. And there's an interesting story that goes along with it. One of the things that we did with corn is dried corn in particular, is we would soak the white corn in with water with ash. So it's like a lye that would come out of the ash, the wood ash, hardwood ashes, and it would soften the hulls, and then we could rinse it off, and then we'd have the soft corn inside. So that's how we prepared our corn. It also actually added niacin to the corn, interestingly enough. So we could store it indefinitely, and just by using wood ash and water, we could prepare the food for whether we were making mush or what people would know as grits, I guess, or corn soups or cornbread, all that stuff. But after Sullivan came through and burnt like major amounts of corn, we had all this parched, burnt corn, and our people realized that if you took that corn that was parched, and you could, that would actually crack the hulls. So the Senecas have a variety of corn soup out here. They call it roast corn soup because that's what we do. In fact, just last weekend I was up at my friend Ross's and Holly's. We were roasting corn. We just take the white corn and we put it over open fire and brown the corn, and then we take off the kernels, and then we store those roasted kernels, and that's what we make corn soup out of. So the Senecas are famous for their roast corn soup as a way to survive after this this aggressive act, this attempt to starve. It's funny, I just heard on the news between this show and the previous show about how the UN says it's illegal to starve people as a military strategy. Well, that's exactly what George Washington was trying to do. I mean, he actually he referred to it as inflicting terror upon the Senecas. So it's actually the first documented case of using terrorism specifically as a military strategy, one that would affect not just the people you terrorize, but future generations. And that's exactly what Washington laid out. If you ever look up the orders for for the Sullivan campaign, you can read it with your own eyes. So it's amazing stuff. Nick, I want to thank you. I was hoping of all people to call in that it would be you. So I appreciate you making the call.
Yeah, I love your show.
Well, I appreciate listeners like you who, like I said, I will say that I think you're actually the first one that I did a show upon request. But I did plan to talk about it eventually. I didn't know I was going to do it when I was going to do it, but I'm glad you happened to be listening when I did. So thanks a lot. I appreciate it. All right, we'll try to get one quick. If there's is there another caller? We'll do one more.
I was just about to tell you that. Yep,
we got one more. So we got for a short call. Go ahead, caller. You're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Okay, thanks. James Baker from Brooklyn.
Hey, how you doing? It's good to hear from you.
In reference to Obama and his view of the land grab stuff. Well, Obama, we have to remember, the only difference between him and most European males is this: that thin layer of skin, hair texture, got it just like me, same color, and his voice. The rest of Obama is all European male.
No, and I understand that. He was raised by a white woman, no less. So,
I know a lot of people would disagree with that, but listen to his voice. Look at his book.
Yeah.
Everything other than his wife, right, and kids, right? So you understand why he has that view. And where was he indoctrinated? What was he indoctrinated with? Yeah.
Yeah.
And truth is, most people of African descent has bought into this sham, this lie.
Well, and I got to tell you, the reason I did this film is because most Native people bought into some of these lies too. So I'm trying to re-educate my own people as I re-educate everybody else. So it's
right.
Look, it's one of the most frustrating things is when you do learn this stuff and you come to know this stuff and you realize how many people reject it, even though you got the information. I mean, we live in a world now where all the information is at our fingertips. It's on our phone, for crying out loud. But we still find ourselves in a situation where we've got to try to convince people. It's like, what's that line? Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? I mean, it's like, yeah, this is it. I mean, and so no, and look,
And you know what, too?
Go ahead.
I would say this. Most Europeans has bought into this idea, but in the truth, most Europeans are left out of it.
yeah,
But
yeah.
they still go along with it because what does the people on top say? Well, you remember, you are so-called white.
Yeah. Well,
That's
and the status
the
quo
whole thing.
serves the those who
Yeah,
are benefiting
it's
now
there.
are going to want that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And it sucks them in. Actually, willful ignorance. That's what I call it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I call it. So I appreciate that. Look, I appreciate
Okay.
the call. I
Hey,
appreciate
thanks,
the
though. I
comment.
appreciate it. Hey, great show, man.
All right, thanks.
I'd like to see that movie, so let us know when you're going to show it down here in Brooklyn.
All right, I will do that. We're looking at possibly what is that? The Nighthawk Theater over in Williamsburg. That's what we're looking at, by the way.
Oh, the Nighthawk Theater.
Yeah, yes, that's what
nice.
we're- yeah, so-
Oh, okay.
so-
All right.
Well, and I'm looking at the Maisels up in Harlem too, just so people know. But
I know because I gave you the contact.
Yeah, Kazembe and those. Well, and I did something with Kazembe a few years ago. I think with Jeremiah.
I know you did.
Hosea down in Brooklyn, as a matter of fact. So, but no.
Oh
It's,
yeah, with Jeremiah Hosea.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
right. You
yeah,
did.
so-
Yeah.
So
I totally
look,
remember
we're gonna get this thing out. Look, will the long hope be a game changer? I don't know, but I'm hoping so, because once you cross into an area that, look, I've been doing radio for over a decade, but now I'm trying to get into this, and I don't know what it's going to lead to, but I'm hoping enough people will see this film, and the fact that we get accepted into a major film festival on the West Coast is kind of exciting news, because it means that somebody's already looked at it to say, all right, this has value. Let's give it some consideration. So, look for me. I'm gonna keep putting more posts up. I thank people for listening to the show, and I'm hoping we'll get more people to express an interest in being invited to the private screenings until we can finally do the public screenings. So, I appreciate all you folks. Remember, if you ever ask yourself, what can you do to help? You can support WBAI. That's one way you can help me and help a native voice be heard beyond what I can be heard from here on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. I want to thank you. I'm John Kane, and this is Resistance Radio. Yahweh.